Well, hello there. How are you doing? In fact, tell us in the comments right away. Tell us in the comments, how are you doing? Tell us where you're from. We want to hear from you. This is a show where you're involved. So I am Dave Burse. I am just a chap who's talking to you over the internet. And this is the Interaction Field series of conversations, interviews with really interesting people, and boy, do we have an interesting guy today. This is going to be an absolute beauty, so please strap in, get ready to take notes, and please ask questions because we want you to get involved. We want to hear your questions. If you've got any comments, anything you'd like answered, please put it in the comments. I'm going to be keeping my eye on them, and I will be bringing your questions in later in the show. So first of all, I think it's time to introduce the man behind Vivaldi himself. This is Erich Joachimsthaler. Erich, hello. It's a very good morning to you.
Is that the sign of the day?
I think so. I mean, could it be that? I mean, for all the books we're tuning in.
Peace.
So how are things in New York this morning?
It is wonderful. It is finally sunny again, you know, which we get a lot, you in London never see. So so we've been surprised for a few days of cloudiness, but it's perfect. It's a perfect day.
Very good. So we have got an amazing guest today. We've got Thomas Wedell-Wedelsborg.
You mean me?
Yes, of course. Yeah, we always would amazing. Well, you're not a guest. You're a host. that's like going into your own house and expecting everyone just to give you biscuits and sit you down and pump up your cushions. So we've got Thomas Wedell-Wedelsborg, who I believe Thomas's colleagues at Harvard Business Review refer to him as Thomas W squared, which I think is that's a great name. So Thomas is Danish, but he works all over the world helping managers, business leaders solve problems more effectively. And that's nice. I think it's a fantastic thing to do. It's something I enjoy doing as well. Now, his work on innovation has led to HR Magazine recognizing him as a top 20 international thinker. He's the co-author of Innovation as Usual as a book, and he's the author of What's Your Problem? Now, I am a Glaswegian. I am from Scotland, and when people say, what's your problem? It's usually quite aggressive. It's usually like, what's your problem? But it's not like that. It's much more gentle. So let's say hello to Thomas Wedell-Wedelsborg. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, Dave. Hey, Eric. And yes, we Danes, we are much more gentle. Like all of our more warrior-like people, they were Vikings and they went elsewhere in the world earlier in history. So kind of, we're the pacifists.
Yes, I'm a Viking myself. I found out that through my ancestry. I'm very Viking in my DNA. So you managed to get rid of the aggressive ones, that they all went to Glasgow. So Thomas, I absolutely love your book. It's got lovely diagrams. It doesn't seem like a typical Harvard Business Review kind of book. It's got a different feel to it, and it's very easy to read. It's got lovely diagrams in it. It's got wit. I'll tell you, one of the things that I love is you've got a checklist at the back, and I look for the little details, and there's a little tear along this line detail here, and it says desecrate book along this line, or download a copy. And it just feels really nice, and it's got a warmth and wit to it. Could you give us a quick rundown of what the book's about?
Of course, and I'm so glad that at least one reader discovered that Easter egg. It's kind of like there's a couple of others around the book. We'll see. The essence of my work is really around problem solving and a missing link in that, because like we've come to learn at school, at work, that kind of problem solving has two components, namely analysis and then solving it. Like, you know, when you have a problem, you go in, you analyze it, you understand it, and then you go solve it, or maybe you flick back and forth between these two. The missing link there is framing. The missing skill is a higher level kind of ability to go in and make sure, wait, are we even solving the right problems here? Are there problems we need to go out and even identify before we can go in and dissect them? Super simple reminder of this, or kind of illustration I use in the book, and that's kind of, this is the 30-second way of explaining what reframing is and how it's different from analysis. And that comes down to something I call the slow elevator problem. You know, you have a building and the tenants, they're complaining about the speed of the elevator. This graphic captures that notion. You can see here basically two very different ways of framing the problem. What most people do is they go in and say, well, the elevator is slow, how do we make it faster? Jumping straight into solution mode. Some people go in and say, hey, why is the elevator slow? But even that question is still stuck in analysis. And then if you ask a landlord, of course, and you can see that down here, an experienced landlord will tell you, hey, one potential way of solving complaints about a slow elevator has nothing to do with the speed of the elevator, but putting up mirrors in the hallway. Because of course, when people arrive, they get distracted by the mirror, they fall in love with their own image, and so on. That is a solution to a different problem. And the job of the innovator or the problem solver here is not to solve initially, it's not even to analyze initially, it's actually to take a step further back and say, what is the right problem to solve? Is there another part of the problem that we're not noticing here that we need to go into? That's a high level, like that core skill of making sure we solve the right problems through framing and reframing them correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's it's a phenomenal skill. There's something when I've been running workshops with clients, we look at assumptions, because people just have assumptions, and their assumptions become a filter that stops them seeing more broadly. And it's one of the reasons why companies come up with the same kinds of ideas, the same kinds of ways of trying to solve a problem again and again, rather than being able to look more broadly. Yeah. Absolutely.
Like that core skill of problem finding and kind of almost maybe problem creation, which we can delve into more.
Yeah. Now, Erich,
I'm curious what you're gonna say. You know, like you seem to be stumbling for ideas or words. But I think that what I think is interesting here is when you where your shoulder is, Thomas. You know, the question is really what a person really cares about. You know, it's like and what he really cares about, and the reframe here is being annoyed about any waiting. You know, so
absolutely.
So that's sort of the reframe. And what I find very interesting is you know, we at Vivaldi, we speak a lot about consumer challenges, consumer problems. So what I really want to sort of like what captures my attention is, how do you reframe a consumer challenge? You know, what you know, remember years ago that Henry Ford said, if I had asked customers what they want, they would have told me they want a faster horse. And Steve Jobs has repeated that many times before. So yes, consumers complain, let's say, or consumer feel like there is a need of a faster elevator. But how do we use your methodology in your framework to actually solve consumer problems, things that they don't really have articulated?
Well, that's what I want to get into, because I found, you know, the viewers might not know, but Erich was instrumental in getting my first book out, because he connected us. Erich's, what was it? Was that your second book, Erich, Hidden in Plain Sight?
Yeah.
That came out on Harvard Business Press, and Erich was kind enough to help us both, kind of with my old co-author Patty Miller. He was kind enough to help us both get in touch with the agent and kind of work through many of the ideas we had with the thing. So this, like, there's a long intellectual history here. And so I'm super curious to go in as well and try to connect what we're talking about here to all of your stuff. Like what is the interaction field between reframing and interaction fields, if you will. And so I think, so we cheated a bit and spoke before this call about what we might do. And we landed on a little bit of a structure here that I'll just put up here. for thinking through some of this. Now, this is kind of mostly from my end, but kind of saying, you know, looking at somebody who's tasked with finding new models, innovating, dealing with customer needs, but maybe in a branding related sense to, like, you know, is there a structure here around thinking about how do we solve known problems better? How do we reframe known problems to find new aspects? And then what we'll get to towards the end, like the interaction field, what is that? How do you see all of this in compared to framing? And we'll delve into that.
Well, you know, I can tell you about what I try to do with the interaction field book. You know, I was, so if you look at your framework, solving known problems, you know, that's one way of using digital technologies. You know, and if you look at the second problem, you know, of reframing existing problems and finding some new, that's what I call platforms and ecosystems, and it's another digital technology, if you will. And what I looked at with interaction fields, I say this is how you address unarticulated, latent needs that consumers even haven't talked about and have appreciated. And if you look at the first one, if you look at the first as an example, you know, I'm fascinated by this one because it's an incredible success story, and that is Domino's Pizza. You know,
yeah.
As far as I know, Domino's always was about fast and convenient delivery, very fast, 30 minutes, or it is free. It wasn't about the product as much, and that's a good example of applying technologies, and they have done a lot of these. You know, if you the latest technology I discovered is you can now order pizza without any touch. You know, all you have to do is open the app, and the pizza knows the pizza already goes into the oven, and it is delivered, and you get sort of a tracking. You can see visually the tracking when the pizza goes in the oven, when it goes in the box, when it is delivered, and when the person stands at the door, you know, knocks at the door. It's sort of like a beautiful thing. So it's using technology in order to solve an existing problem.
Yeah, and that can be really helpful. I mean, there's a lot of business innovation that is doing that, and they're doing it well and kind of, you know, amazing. You know,
yeah.
For my part, I'm you know, when drinking coffee, I'm thinking about, could I just plug this in straight away into my veins? Like, skip another step, you know, if you like. But I mean, there's an amazing kind of thing ongoing there. What I'm thinking about that, though, is that that's fairly accessible to everybody. Yeah. It's kind of like your competitors can do it too, if as soon as they kind of get up on their digital horse and figure out, you know, how do we do this? And that can be a long journey, but we're getting there. Domino's is one great example. What would you say? How do you see the second one? Like that issue of like reframing known problems. How do you think about that in your space?
So when you think about reframing a known problem, is you think of Airbnb as the classic example of a platform ecosystem. You know, you say, hey, we all know that to stay at a hotel or in a room, that's a known problem. But the way Airbnb has done that is they reframed in some ways the way that the consumer needs that are solving. And I think that's sort of like a good example, perhaps.
Yeah, I thought, like, when I thought of, like, you said Domino's over here, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you said Airbnb, what I thought about was kind of, this was almost a mix here, because if you look at people traveling to a new city, they need accommodation, and Airbnb is a different way of getting accommodated. What I thought was interesting was the recognition that there was, call it a latent need, call it an opportunity among house owners. Like, you know, I didn't go around and think about, well, my spare guest bedroom is actually an underutilized resource. You know, that was just my bedroom or my spare bedroom. And so it was interesting to me that this, what Airbnb did. Now, this was like, as you say, kind of a two-party, almost market engineering.
Two-sided marketplace, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. But they did go in and kind of shift like homeowners, their perception of kind of like, they highlighted, was it even a problem? It was kind of something that was under the surface of a problem, almost saying, wait, here's actually a new thing you can do to supplement your budget, which I think is powerful. I wanted to share.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Did you have?
No. Go ahead. I agree.
Oh, excellent. I wanted to share like an example that's on I think in your space you're dealing a lot with like the strategic kind of industry level CEO thinking. I've kind of also tackled some questions or problems that are maybe more mundane, but I think that are really powerful illustrators of what reframing can be. And so I'm going to share an example that has nothing to do with technology, because we can sometimes, like, digital is incredibly important, but we can sometimes think that it is all about digital, and that's not necessarily the case. The example now, I'll almost, I mean, you know what company this is, Erich. So do you want to give the 10-second introduction to?
No. Blackbox, I assume.
Blackbox, exactly. Yeah. Blackbox is a company founded by Matt Meek-Cartestreich, Henrik Rödlin. We happen to know Henrik, and they kind of recently IPO'd here. What Blackbox does is kind of in part to send out to like, if you have a dog, you're a dog parent, well, they send out crates of stuff to dogs, and there's a lot more offerings. But what I wanted to zoom in on was the toys, because they are one of the world's biggest kind of manufacturers of toys, and they figured out what do dogs like in a toy. Like, if you have this thing, there's a lot of different parameters you can consider with a dog toy. Why do dogs prefer one to the other? Is it the squeaky sound? Is it kind of the smell? Is it the texture, and so on? All of those are just like known issues in the dog space, and you know that oh yeah, we know these parameters and we can figure out what this is. What Bach figured out was that there was an overlooked aspect that had a tremendous impact on whether the dog preferred one toy or the other. And that is whether the human liked it. Like, they realized that the key thing for a dog isn't always the toy, it is the interaction with its parents, like the human parents, that the dog really likes. And so if you can create a toy that makes your human more likely to play with you for longer, then the dog loves it. Example, evidently, these two guys. Kind of, you know, here we have the Dognall and I don't remember what they call the Biden here, of course, but you can see how when you have this kind of stuff and your dog walks up and you go, so, oh yeah, so who are you going to bite? Who are you going to vote for? You know, they realize that a good dog toy is as much about how it facilitates more interaction and more play between the human and the dog as it is about any specific squeaky sound or whatever it is. So just a beautiful example for me of like a very non-technological aspect of how you can still find new angles on a problem we've dealt with for ages and ages. So any immediate reactions to that? That was like a slightly longer example.
No, that's exactly what it's about. You know, it's like, think of it's solving some adjacent needs that consumers may have. In this case, it's not only the needs of the dog, but also the needs of the dog owner, and it's sort of an emotional connection maybe with the toy itself. You know, like, it's much more fun to play with the figurine. You know, you could, for example, have one of these toys be your boss, and you can have the dog go like, ah.
So one of the biggest things that they had, this is a small funny example, but this is Consuela, and that's one of their biggest selling toys. Why is that? Yeah. Well, on the surface it looks kind of regular, but actually when the dog, like many of the dogs, they destroy the toy. Yeah. And when they do, well, inside there's actually a sad version. Oh, so literally, like, you're happy on the outside, sad on the inside. This huge, like, they got a crazy amount of free marketing, just people putting this up, and like big things. So they become really good at kind of doing those types of things.
I think that really is a great example. It goes also back to technology, because it solves some additional needs, and that's where the power of an advantage and comes in. Why a business starts growing, because they are solving for something that you couldn't solve. For example, with an Airbnb. If you will, if you put up your flat in New York City, yes, I don't have the room service, but I actually meet some people, some real people from New York. There's a community. I live in the house of a stranger, and when I leave, I am no longer that much of a stranger. Actually, that if I'm an owner of an apartment, I actually used Airbnb for a while here because we have a large flat in New York, and I tried it out for a few times. I remember still the conversations I had with guests, and it was sort of delightful, in fact, from international. So there is additional, you're solving for a primary goal, if you will, a primary need, namely an accommodation at a reasonable price, but you're also solving for something else that is like an emotional connection, and that makes it a huge difference, you know.
Exactly. There's almost like parallels here to, you know, the old Blue Ocean stuff about, oh, there's this other aspect of what people value that we haven't quite considered, which I think is beautiful. Now let's get to the interaction field bit, because this is where I feel this is kind of the new ground area, and I think even the two of us are still trying to figure out, you know, how does this align with framing and so on. So can you kind of, how would you compare to what we just spoke about here? What is this?
Yeah, well, you know, I have many examples in the book that I described. Described in agriculture, John Deere. I described insurance companies, Discovery, Vitality, and so forth and so forth. But, you know, in the John Deere example, John Deere is in the business of selling tractors. And when you think about one of the ways to think about tractors is precision farming. You know, how to more precisely cut, if you will, a semi-autonomous or autonomous tractor via a semi-autonomous tractor the field. That's interesting. That's increasing productivity, but isn't all that exciting. It's just putting technology onto a tractor and makes something more precise. The more interesting part is when you reframe this whole business of farming, if you will, and says, how do we really increase the productivity of the farm? And when if you want to solve for that one, you're not solving it by a more high technology tractor. You're solving it by getting farmers to work together, which is in part of an interaction field, by maybe farmers sharing productivity data of the farm, by actually the tractors, let's say, or other means, to actually track the health of a plant or the health of the entire field. And if you start now collecting data and what we call interactions, data on a daily basis of how one field is doing or one farm is doing, share that with other farmers. You create what's called a network effect. Farmers can learn from farmers. If you share those data, not just in order to run better tractor or the tractor more efficiently through it, but you share those data also with crop manufacturers or fertilizer manufacturers. Now you can optimize the entire farm. So to me, in the action fields is that next level. You're solving for problems that you don't even know that you have, you know, that these unarticulated problems. And that's just one example. You know?
So one of the things I thought your book partially explained was actually why we're seeing that continually increasing dropout rate of the, SP 500, whatever. Because if you are over here in this system, well, there are paradigm shifts, but it's kind of somewhat stable. Okay, we have now established like the Airbnb side doing this. Over here, as you are pointing out, there's a lot of different stakeholders. They are not just interacting with you, but they're also enabling new things. You're kind of like, and this is a much more dynamic field. Like, I love that term of interaction because that's exactly what it is. It's not a stable system at all.
Yeah. If you look at the example we had, Airbnb is interacting or collecting the data, if you will, of on one side the host and on the other side the traveler. But who has those data? Airbnb. And then they add to that additional services like insurance, property management, cleaning services, and whatever, in order to make it a safe place for you to stay at a stranger's place, let's say. But that's really not an interaction field, because it's really Airbnb controlling the data and then adding some additional service, adjacent services, to make the value proposition a great one. And obviously that's a success models.
Yeah.
But what if those data, those interactions actually are shared, and now you're not hoarding, not John Deere is not hoarding those data and sort of like sells more tractors, but John Deere actually shares those data with crop manufacturers, and on and on and on. Then you're suddenly solving for problems that we didn't even know they existed.
I had when we spoke about this, I actually flashed back to a completely different field that has some of the same properties, namely the army. If you look at the work of General David Petraeus around counterinsurgency and that new doctrine, that was a really interesting shift in kind of warfare, where you saw the traditional model was kind of like, hey, we shoot the enemy and that's it, great. What he realizes with your
pretty rough. I thought Danish, relative to Germans, I thought Danish people are kinder, sort of like.
We are. I normally joke that. So I spent 4 years in the Danish army, but mostly what we did was to run around and practice saying we surrender in different languages. No, but I think what Petraeus kind of arrived at, and he's not the only one. There's a group of people behind it. Was really that when you're fighting insurgencies, like meaning where the local populace starts to rise up against you and so on, you're actually not trying to disable the enemy. You are trying to get the populace on your side. Because once the local population who's not involved in the fighting starts liking you better than the insurgents, then the support they need to operate disappears. And so what a beautiful story. This means that you have to think very differently about your role. A friend of mine who was abroad, he was in an engagement, and accidentally the peacekeeping forces, they shot a cow. Like there was a cow, boom, 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 it died. Yep. And now they had to go in and negotiate with the village elder to pay him a reasonable amount for the cow, to make sure that they kept good relations with the local populace. And he told this beautiful story of the village elder coming in and saying, well, this was a very expensive cow. This was in fact a limousine cow. You're just trying to kind of haggle with the price. So a very, like, what I notice is you see this dynamic in kind of companies and industries and so on. You also see it in bigger other systems, including the army. This very different conceptualization of what problems you're even dealing with.
Yeah, and I think that that's why I like your methodology. And I think this book is really that you have is so valuable, because if you just go through, define the jobs to be done, and then you go through a design routine to solve for the job, you're really shortcutting yourself for the opportunity. You're still into your military analogy, is shooting the enemy. Yeah. But if you are saying, look, in order to solve the problem, I need to reframe this and look at this from the contextual point of view, in this case, the village. I think that everyone, then now you sort of solving that problem actually solves for winning the battle, if you will, or winning that sort of the thing. So I think it's a wonderful analogy that you got there.
Thank you, David.
Dave is linking in because he has a question. He has a problem with what we were talking about, I guess.
No, we've got some stuff here now. There's a quote that's come in here, Thomas, that I know is one that you have got comment about.
Yeah.
So, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes stating the problem, the remaining 5 finding the problem, attributed to Einstein. Now,
thanks for sharing that.
What miracle in this, because I know that you've got comments on this.
Well, I think this is both a really good quote and a really dangerous quote. The good part of the quote is that it tells you to pay attention to the problem. And that, like, Einstein has this badly beautiful quote about seeing old problems from a new angle. That's absolutely right. Now, the only issue I have with this quote is it actually tells you how to use your time. It tells you directly, spend, if you have X amount of time, spend 90% of that just thinking on a mountain deep thoughts and so on. And then at the very end, you jump into action. This is everything that the whole lean startup design thinking space has taught us not to do, because then you stay too long in the thinking phase. So if I were to tweak that quote, I would actually say it is not a linear process. Exactly what Erich just spoke about. Don't just define the problem, then go solve it. No, it is like in design thinking, you see, it is this loop where you continually switch between the three elements I shared before, framing, analyzing, and solving. And even I'd argue this continues after you have a successful business. Many of the failures I think you see, the classic story is the Nokia Apple story, right? Where suddenly Stephen Elop, who's the CEO at the time, writes out a message to everybody, says, folks, we are solving the wrong problem. We're focusing on making better hardware, phones. Apple is beating us because they are building an ecosystem. And we missed completely that our industry kind of developed in that sense.
Yeah. A good example that I find that is to me a wonderful interaction field is it's the most valuable, largest fintech company in the world, and it's larger than all fintech companies combined in the UK or combined in the US, and that is Ant Financial. If you start with Ant, they started to do a very simple thing, namely allow you to buy something via a mobile phone. And because in China at the time, cash was not available. Cash was the only currency, and you can buy online on cash. And what happened is, and that starting point was called Alipay. And Alipay used, and the only thing they solved for is for people to be able to buy something online. And then they said, why just online? You can also buy it on the kiosk, with a QR code and everything else. Now Chinese took to that paying via the mobile phone so much that now 1.3 billion people do that, but they buy everything on Alipay. So here it is. Within 6 years, Ant Group, is it called now? Ant Group has become this huge success story in the fintech. But why? Because the Alipay story is only the first iteration. Once they had all the information about how you buy something, where you buy something in the kiosk, pay for a movie ticket, pay for your Tinder membership or whatever you at your age are using, let's say. So once they had that information, they said, well, maybe we can solve some of the much bigger problems, like Chinese. If you don't have a credit card, doesn't exist. If you only buy cash, you don't have a credit history. So if you need a loan, you can't have a loan because you don't have a credit history, you don't have a credit card, whatever, all of these things. So, but Ant solved that and said, we can now offer a loan product that actually, based on this information that we have from the pay, and that actually gets consumers access to loans. There was one part, and I could go on and on and on. That was the next iteration. So if you go 2021 now, Ant has solved for problems and challenges of living in the new economy, if you will, in China and globally, that nobody ever would have thought. So it wasn't about just thinking about it like Einstein. It was about actually starting out creating that nucleus, I call it in my book, that interaction field, that core part of the interaction, and then building platform ecosystems around it. I
mean, there's this concept in the research behind this that's called problem finding.
Yeah.
Which I think partially applies to what we're talking about here. Problem finding, or even like problem creation, if you will, to some extent. Like, you're literally not just going in here with the known problems, you are going in and breaking completely new ground. And as you're pointing out, this is a cycle that moves. These companies are constantly shifting their nature, constantly on a corporate time scale, if you will.
Yeah, but in a way, what we are talking about is if in this day and age, you want to be successful in business, you want to think about your company, And if you start doing marketing research in order to survey consumers what they want, if you will, you end up in phase one. If you're in the Domino's examples, that may be a good place to be if you are like Domino's, have such an incredible success model. That's that. But if you really want to be successful, you need to start thinking about reframing that problem, using the tools that you have in your book. And then, and beyond that, you need to start, getting into that process, the 3 steps are framing, analyzing, solving, framing, analyzing, solving. I think otherwise, that's the success story. That's why Ant Financial or Ant Group is such a huge success in the business. So I think it is that the challenge has to be to solve unarticulated needs and sort of these hard to recognize needs from consumers. And the answer lies in the framing of the answer lies in reading the book. What's your problem?
And then all your problems are solved. Dave?
We've got another comment here, which is actually, it's a lovely example of reframing a problem. So Tony's talking about 5-hour energy and how previously you needed to have a big bladder if you were tired. You were tired, you wanted energy, you needed to have a big bladder because you've got a Monster drink or you've got something big, and it's just like, well, hold on.
Yeah.
if I'm tired, am I also thirsty? No, give me a shot.
Yeah.
And that to me is a beautiful way of taking an assumption and shattering it and reframing things. I just thought that was a really lovely example in the comments.
I love that. Like, so you can see, like Tony's example, how it suddenly decouples something we always thought just was one thing. For my part, I'm still looking for a substitute for tea and coffee that kind of combines both elements without being either. Like, tea doesn't quite do the job for me. Coffee, it gets too much. So maybe it is the.
Yeah. What I like about 5-hour energy in that example is that, it isn't this complex problem. How do we solve our agriculture problems or financial services problems in China, let's say, which I wrote in my book. But it's this very simple day-to-day sort of things that reframing it in, applies equally and it becomes hugely successful if you know the story of 5-hour energy.
That's a critical point to me, because I think sometimes because it's so interesting to talk about Ant Financial and kind of what those big moves, we kind of sometimes leave most people out of that conversation because, like, who can do this if they're not a CEO or running a big startup or whatever? Yeah. But what we're talking about here, like the Bach example, the 5-hour energy example, that's something that no matter where your level is, like whatever problems you're dealing with, those are accessible things that individual people can go out and do. Yeah. And incidentally, Dave, you mentioned kind of the format of the book and the drawings. Like, that was my design philosophy behind it. I wanted it to be accessible because there's too often we kind of end up speaking only to the people who are at the very top of the pyramid in the organization and can do stuff. This is relevant for everybody.
Yeah. Now, there's something I'm kind of interested in. We're talking about sort of reframing the problems here. There's obviously, we're in a moment in history where organizations are having to deal with problems that they didn't see coming. And I've got a LinkedIn learning course that on how to innovate in a crisis. And one of the things that I talk about—
Advertising.
There you go. Go and take my LinkedIn learning course.
Exactly.
So one of the things I talk about is that no organization or individual lives in isolation. They live in context. And what happens is that the context is constantly changing and they have to stay relevant. They have to keep up with the environment that's changing around them. Yeah. And what happens at a time like this is that suddenly the environment changes in this sort of seismic jolt, and it's accelerated everything several years really in terms of digital adoption. And that now these companies have to then work out where's the gap. And the problem is, because they've got so many things they take for granted, they're not very good at analyzing what it is that's out of pace with the environment that they're in. What tricks have you got for organizations to be able to look at themselves, look at the situation they're in, and identify the very things that they actually need to address?
So,
Eric,
I can give you some examples. What we do at Vivaldi, that's we compare. We don't ask consumers. We don't just do an ethnography that would be interesting itself, and we do plenty of those. But what we do is we map. We look at groups of consumers, and we map what their goals are, the activities are on a daily basis for maybe an activity, like working from home, let's say. And then we compare some leading edge consumers with somebody or somebody who has done maybe who works from home exclusively versus some people who work only partially from home, or some across various professions, let's say, because some professions allow it to do it more easily over work from home, let's say. And by looking at the activities and what people actually do, the actual behaviors, we can then, and compare that, we can then infer what potential things that can be done, So it's rather than, in a normal survey, I would ask consumers, what are their needs, what are their wants, things, and all of these things. In an ethnography, I sort of like try to map thoughts and feelings and emotions, but that will not help me. So I actually look at I map sort of the daily life journeys, and then I say, how can we change those? How can we enable those daily life journeys? I think that's our sort of like approach at Vivaldi.
Yeah, but the way I see it is this places much greater emphasis on the organizations and your personal listening apparatus, like literally not just your mentality of trying to make sure what's going on, but how you actually do it. Like, as an organization, are we exposed to what's going on? And do we know how to take that information and bring it into our decision making? As an individual, like, what are you spending your time on in terms of absorbing new things and what's going on in the marketplace? And I don't just mean reading, your industry journal or whatever. Like, much more the almost the qualitative nature of what Eric was talking about, really going out and getting almost a sense of what's going on. But like my experience, and we're running out of space now on this whiteboard, but like before problems are identified, like, oh, here is the problem we're solving, it's almost as if you start with a sense of a broader opportunity space or something. You kind of have a sense like, wait, there's something here that's off. And going, when you have that feeling, trying to delve in and try to get as much understanding of what's going on here, looking at in the ecosystem you're in, are there parties whose role we are forgetting? Like, are there people we need to think differently about in terms of what their role is? Lots of stories around how, business model innovation, for instance, has changed thinking because certain actors suddenly gain much more prominence or something changed. Do you notice that? So that high level reflection, I'd say.
Great. Now, it's actually, as always happens here, time has flown. We could keep talking for hours, I'm sure, but I want to sort of finish off, Thomas, by just asking you, if there's somebody who wants to get started on starting to reframe problems and starting to understand how to approach problems in a more effective way, what would be your one piece of advice after going by this book? But what would be your one piece of advice for people to go and get started?
Get one or two people you work with to understand what you're talking about, because ultimately it is an individual skill, but it is so much harder to do if you don't have one or two other people who kind of get what you're talking about. It's a tremendous help to have a colleague, or even on the home front, somebody, when you say, hey, I think we need to reframe this problem a bit, they know what you're talking about, so you can work together to make that happen and to get other colleagues kind of to understand it. It's difficult to do alone. Like, go in and get one or two other people on board with what the framing is. Yeah,
that is called selling. You're just saying, okay, don't buy one book, buy 3 books.
Well, In fact, my advice is get your entire organization to no, like, first of all, lend them your copy of the book. Harvard doesn't want me to say this, but you could. And there's free resources online that you can kind of like, I have some videos and like this recording for that matter, that'll give them a sense of what it is. So you don't necessarily have to fork out more money for books.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thomas, and as you're saying there, you are incredibly generous with your resources online. So you've got, for people to go, they should go to, there's thomaswedell.com. And you've got another one which is about how to reframe. Is that right?
Yeah, howtoreframe.com, and there's just some free resources. Like what I'm really trying to do with my work is to democratize reframing. So I think it's insane that this is something we only learn at a relatively late point in life. We should be teaching this to people at university and in their first jobs, because everybody has problems irrespective of where they are kind of on the career ladder. So I on the site, there is a good deal of kind of stuff to get you started on this journey.
Hey guys,
fantastic.
Chapter 4 in my book is about framing and reframing.
Exactly.
It has a great story in there, Lego, and it's from Denmark, actually, where Thomas comes from. So that's another place to get started.
There we go.
That's right, like the framing and writing chapter.
Thank you so much.
And while everyone else is at it, go out and buy my book as well. Great stuff
Okay, there we go.
And I have some high quality glasses I'd like to sell. Just all in.
There we go.
So thank you so much, Thomas. That was absolutely wonderful. I hope that was entertaining and useful for everyone as well. Please go along to Thomas's website, download those documents. I've already got them filed away in my Evernote for when I need them. Erich, thank you so much again. And viewer, thank you for joining us. Thank you for giving us your questions and comments throughout. That's been absolutely wonderful. And look after yourself. We will be back soon. And that's it from us for today. Mwah. Goodbye now.
Hey, that's very...